Welcome to History Without Sleep, where the past whispers its secrets into the present. Tonight, we journey deep into one of the most transformative periods in American economic history, the era of railroad regulation. From the vast plains of the Midwest to the bustling ports of the East Coast, steel rails carved paths for commerce, conflict, and regulation. This is the story of how America wrestled with the power of railroads between 1887 and 1917. Stay with me, as every detail, every act, and every struggle unfolds in its full, fascinating complexity. By the 1880s, railroads were the arteries of the United States. They connected farms to cities, factories to ports, and people to opportunity. Yet, their dominance brought fear, freight rates varied wildly, monopolies formed, and farmers cried out against unfair pricing. The Interstate Commerce Commission, established in 1887, was America's first attempt to regulate this sprawling network, but its powers were limited. To understand why, we must look closely at the railroads themselves, how they were built, financed, and controlled by powerful tycoons. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 marked a turning point. Congress sought to curb the abuses of railroad monopolies by requiring transparency in freight rates and outlawing discriminatory practices. Yet, enforcement proved tricky. Railroad companies often challenged the law in court, exploiting loopholes and delaying compliance. In the early years, the ICC lacked the authority to enforce fines effectively, making it more of an advisory body than a regulatory powerhouse. Still, the act laid the foundation for future interventions. Newspapers chronicled the struggle between railroads and farmers. Headlines screamed about railroad tyranny and monopoly abuse, rallying public opinion behind reform. Editorial cartoons mocked powerful railroad magnates, depicting them as greedy giants towering over helpless citizens. This public outrage put pressure on politicians to strengthen regulatory powers, setting the stage for later amendments and acts that would redefine the relationship between government and industry. In the years immediately following the 1887 Act, railroad companies tested the limits of the law in courts. Cases such as Wabash v. Illinois revealed the weaknesses of state-level regulation and confirmed the need for federal oversight. This period of legal wrangling highlighted a core tension in American governance: the struggle to balance corporate power with public interest. It was a slow, painstaking battle, with victories often coming only after prolonged litigation. By 1890, the foundation had been laid, but much work remained. The railroads had been slowed but not stopped. Monopolistic tendencies persisted. Yet the Interstate Commerce Act was a promise, a commitment that the federal government would monitor, regulate, and where necessary, intervene in one of the nation's most powerful industries. The seeds of a regulatory culture had been sown, which would grow stronger in the years to come. As the 1890s dawned, railroads remained the lifeblood of American commerce, yet public frustration was mounting. Farmers and small businesses continued to face exorbitant freight rates and discriminatory pricing. The limitations of the Interstate Commerce Commission became painfully clear. It could investigate complaints, but lacked the authority to enforce its rulings effectively. Stories of corruption, preferential treatment, and secret rebates filled newspapers, fueling demands for stronger federal intervention. The stage was set for an era of reform. In 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, aiming to curb monopolies and protect competition. While not railroad-specific, its implications were enormous for the industry. Railroads, which had become powerful corporate giants, now faced legal scrutiny for collusion and price fixing. Yet early enforcement was sporadic. Courts often sided with railroads, interpreting the law narrowly, leaving many citizens feeling that justice was slow to arrive. Nevertheless, the act signaled a new willingness to regulate corporate power at a federal level. Throughout the 1890s, railroad companies merged aggressively, consolidating routes and eliminating competition. Giants like the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central expanded their control over regional and national transport networks. While this increased efficiency, it also reduced bargaining power for farmers and small shippers. Public outcry intensified, captured in fiery editorials and cartoons depicting monopolistic barons as puppet masters of the nation's economy. the clamor for stronger regulatory oversight was impossible to ignore. The Interstate Commerce Commission, though established in 1887, still struggled to enforce the law. Railroads challenged ICC orders in court, exploiting loopholes and delaying compliance. Hearings dragged on for months, often years, and the public's faith in regulation waned. Yet the ICC remained a crucial tool, gathering data, documenting abuses, and setting the stage for stronger legislation. Its very existence began to change the conversation around corporate accountability in America. The Panic of 1893 sent shockwaves through the railroad industry. Overbuilding, speculation, and falling revenues led to bankruptcies and reorganizations. Railroads defaulted on bonds, lines were abandoned, and thousands of workers faced unemployment. For regulators, it was both a crisis and an opportunity. The economic turmoil highlighted the need for federal oversight to prevent systemic collapse and protect the public from the unchecked power of railroad tycoons. By 1903, the call for stronger regulation had grown impossible to ignore. Congress passed the Elkins Act, named after Congressman Stephen Elkins. This law targeted the practice of secret rebates, discounts offered selectively to favored shippers. Railroads could no longer grant preferential treatment without facing heavy fines. For the first time, enforcement carried teeth, and the ICC could now penalize companies that violated the law. Though not perfect, it marked a significant step toward leveling the playing field for farmers, merchants, and small businesses. The crowning achievement of this era came in 1906 with the Hepburn Act, spearheaded by Congressman William Hepburn. The act dramatically expanded the ICC's authority, allowing it to set maximum freight rates and oversee pipelines and bridges connected to rail transport. Railroads could no longer evade regulations by internal accounting tricks. The law empowered the federal government to impose binding rates, marking a historic shift from advisory regulation to enforceable oversight. It was a turning point, balancing corporate power with public interest like never before. The public celebrated the Hepburn Act as a victory for fairness. Farmers, small businesses, and laborers finally saw federal enforcement as a credible tool against railroad monopolies. Editorials praised the legislation, and cartoonists illustrated magnates being humbled by the law. While railroads continued to resist where possible, the momentum toward regulatory authority had shifted decisively in favor of the public. From the limitations of the Interstate Commerce Act to the enforcement powers of the Hepburn Act, the years 1890 to 1906 were transformative. Railroads remained powerful, but they could no longer operate unchecked. Public advocacy, economic crises, and legislative ingenuity combined to reshape the regulatory landscape. The ICC had evolved from a powerless advisory board into a formidable federal agency, setting the stage for the next decade of regulation, which would bring the industry even closer under government oversight. By 1906, the Interstate Commerce Commission had transformed from a powerless advisory body into a regulatory force capable of imposing rates and penalties. Yet, its authority was constantly tested. Railroad companies, though restrained by law, still sought ways to challenge regulations through legal maneuvering. Each ruling set precedents, shaping the interpretation of federal oversight. The ICC became not just an administrative body but a battlefield where law, commerce, and public interest clashed daily. One of the defining features of this period was the succession of court cases that tested the ICC's power. Railroads challenged fines and rate orders, claiming violations of constitutional rights. In cases like the Northern Securities Company v. United States, the Supreme Court ruled against railroad monopolies, reaffirming the government's right to regulate corporate giants. Each legal battle reinforced the principle that economic power had to serve the public interest, a concept that would underpin regulation for decades. Even with the Hepburn Act in place, disputes over freight rates persisted. Railroads resisted maximum rates, arguing they could not operate profitably. Regional differences complicated matters. Midwestern grain shippers felt exploited, while Eastern industrial hubs complained about inconsistent charges. The ICC had to navigate complex economic data, negotiate with powerful companies, and balance competing public interests. These struggles revealed how central railroads had become to the national economy, and how high the stakes were for regulation. The American public closely followed the ongoing regulatory battles. Newspapers printed detailed accounts of ICC hearings and court rulings, while editorials urged stronger action against railroad abuses. The power of public opinion became a tool for regulators, pressuring lawmakers to support enforcement. Cartoons continued to lampoon railroad magnates, portraying them as manipulative figures brought low by legal oversight. The interplay between media and policy was increasingly critical in shaping regulation outcomes. Despite legislative victories, enforcement remained challenging. Railroads found subtle ways to circumvent the law, such as through affiliate companies, accounting tricks, or cross-subsidized routes. The ICC's staff struggled to monitor compliance across a vast network. Each enforcement action required meticulous documentation, investigation, and negotiation, often spanning months. The process was slow, but the persistence of regulators gradually shifted the balance of power. The period from 1906 to 1910 also saw rapid technological and economic changes. Railroads were upgrading infrastructure, building more powerful locomotives, and expanding networks into less served regions. Yet, these advancements intensified debates over fair rates and access. Farmers, small shippers, and industrialists demanded transparency and equity. The ICC had to reconcile innovation with regulation, ensuring that progress did not come at the public's expense. By 1910, public sentiment strongly favored regulation, viewing it as necessary to prevent monopolistic abuse. Popular magazines published exposés on railroad practices, further influencing policy debates. Citizens increasingly saw federal oversight as a mechanism to ensure fairness in commerce. The ICC, once regarded as weak, was now respected as a crucial defender of public interest, a symbol of progress and accountability in an era of rapid industrialization. In summary, the years 1906 to 1910 were a period of consolidation and enforcement. Landmark legislation like the Hepburn Act, combined with persistent ICC oversight, began to constrain the unchecked power of railroad companies. Legal battles clarified federal authority, while public advocacy ensured ongoing scrutiny. The regulatory framework of the United States had evolved significantly, laying a robust foundation for the critical years leading into World War I and the Transportation Act of 1920. Railroads would never again operate without substantial oversight from the federal government. By the early 1910s, the Interstate Commerce Commission had matured into a regulatory authority capable of enforcing maximum rates, penalizing infractions, and influencing the operations of a vast railroad network. Yet challenges persisted. Railroads resisted where possible, often testing the limits of legality. Each dispute reinforced the delicate balance between private enterprise and public interest, a balance the federal government was determined to maintain. These years marked a decisive phase in the evolution of railroad regulation, setting the stage for America's entry into global conflict and the temporary nationalization of railroads. Despite the Hepburn Act, enforcement was often contested. Railroads challenged ICC orders in courts, arguing constitutional constraints and questioning rate calculations. The ICC responded with detailed investigations, data analysis, and binding orders. These years saw the Commission refining its methodology, creating a precedent for federal oversight across industries. The public, increasingly aware of railroad influence on daily life, supported these measures, understanding that fair rates meant fair access to markets and equitable economic growth. The regulation of railroads also intersected with labor issues. Railroad workers demanded fair wages and safe working conditions, while the public depended on railroads for consistent goods and travel. The ICC occasionally intervened in disputes, mediating between management and labor to prevent disruptions. These interactions highlighted the broader social role of regulation, showing that oversight was not just economic, it was a matter of public welfare, stability, and trust in American institutions. As Europe plunged into World War I, the U.S. faced new economic pressures. Railroads became crucial for domestic transport, moving food, raw materials, and industrial goods. The ICC worked tirelessly to ensure that rates remained fair, that lines were efficiently coordinated, and that monopolistic practices did not hinder the national economy. These years tested the Commission's authority, but also demonstrated its growing effectiveness in balancing private interests with national priorities. The American public, increasingly literate and connected through newspapers and telegraphs, followed railroad regulation closely. Editorials praised ICC decisions, and citizens understood the value of federal oversight in ensuring fair commerce. Politicians recognized the political capital of supporting regulation, as voters equated oversight with fairness, equity, and modern governance. By 1916, the notion that railroads operated unchecked had become politically unacceptable, and federal authority over transport infrastructure was firmly established. The groundwork laid by the ICC and the Hepburn Act paved the way for the eventual Transportation Act of 1920, which would temporarily nationalize railroads during World War I and formalize federal control. By 1917, as the U.S. entered the war, railroads were placed under federal oversight to ensure coordination for military and economic purposes. The preceding 3 decades of regulation had created a framework that made this unprecedented step possible, demonstrating the cumulative impact of laws, enforcement, and public support. From the first Interstate Commerce Act in 1887 to the pre-war expansions of 1917, the story of railroad regulation is one of persistence, legal innovation, and social transformation. Railroads, once untouchable giants, were gradually brought under public oversight. Each law, from the Elkins Act to the Hepburn Act, strengthened the federal government's ability to enforce fairness and transparency. By 1917, regulation was no longer an experiment, it was an integral part of America's economic and social fabric. Thank you for watching History Without Sleep. If you've enjoyed this deep journey into the evolution of railroad regulation between 1887 and 1917, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Every subscription helps bring the past to life and ensures that the stories shaping our nation are never forgotten. Join us next time as we continue exploring history in all its depth and complexity. Until then, keep your curiosity alive and never let the past sleep.